Welcome to another Roll for Crit News Roundup, where I tell you everything that's been happening in the last week in tabletop gaming. Now, we've got a lot of fun stories this week, and by fun, I mean mostly dark omens, dark tidings, and basically just bad feeling stories. However, there are some good silver lining stories, so let's get to both for this week on March 18th, 2024. Just earlier this year, I talked about a news story involving AI art being used in a GameFound project for Puerto Rico 1897, and how a lot of people reacted bad to it, and then they removed it. In that story, I compared it to some other situations where AI art appeared in tabletop gaming. One in particular was a Magic the Gathering ad. Now, there was more than that instance when AI art and Wizards of the Coast have had to clash heads, but almost every single time, Wizards of the Coast stated that they do not want to use AI art for anything they make for Dungeons & Dragons or Magic the Gathering. That said, apparently that statement may come with an asterisk, which allows the company to change its mind, or maybe more appropriately in this case, the company that owns that company to change its mind. Earlier, apparently at a speech at GamesBeat, Chris Cox, the CEO of Hasbro, which owns Wizards of the Coast, stated how he's excited about using AI in further products. He stated how they've already been using it in some games like Trivial Pursuit Infinite, and apparently in the least recently, the Trivial Pursuit sales have increased by 30%. He stated how it'd be useful not only for the Hasbro brands you may know, such as Transformers, but for things such as Dungeons & Dragons and Magic the Gathering. In particular for those two, he stated how there is a huge history of adventures and art for to be used for making an AI and teaching an AI, which of course means that plenty of them to use to generate, whether it be images, cards, or adventures. Now, I will say he did also state that this would be more for R&D purposes, and in particular, I want to say this quote word for word, that we would need to make sure that we do it in a way that respects the creators we work with, respects their works of art, respects their ownerships of those works, and also creates a fun and safe environment for kids who might want to use it. Now, that last line was definitely more pertained for things like Transformers, Peppa Pig, they're more targeted towards younger audience. Please ignore any Transformers paraphernalia. Please ignore the Transformers fan currently on the camera. But that all said, it's still something to be pretty worried about. I usually just see a lot of red flags when I see people talking about the potential for AI, especially if they happen to own a lot of properties. And I imagine the same is for any of the artists who work on either Dungeons & Dragons or Magic the Gathering. Imagine if all of a sudden a Secret Lair came out with art that looked similar to yours, but it turned out that it was just from an AI that was taught on art they already had from previous cards. That still feels like a low blow, as that could have been a commission for them for another new card, or in this case with the Secret Lair, allowing them to choose which cards they'd want there that speak more to how they see Magic the Gathering and how they relate to it. Now, this also relates to not just art, but also words, because adventures came up a lot for D&D, so I wonder if there's plans to make AI-generated like short adventures, maybe even some of the longer ones. And that also is a scary prospect because there are authors who help write those things. So maybe this is something that I'm just worrying too much about. Maybe this will be all behind the scenes. We would never see AI art being used. It'd be more of like generate some art for how we want this plane to feel, and then we'll start commissioning artists just as we would and pay them the same. But unfortunately, when it comes to any of these AI art generating programs, be it for words or for art, it's not one that has shown to be well received by those that these programs borrow from. So we'll see whether they actually plan to do anything with this, whether it was just Chris Cox using sort of the hype words right now that are trendy in order to get more attention on Hasbro, or if we need to start counting fingers in all the pieces of art that come out in future Magic sets. Last year, I talked about HABA having to enter voluntary insolvency, basically sort of bankruptcy, as they were losing a lot of money, and how they were trying to basically design a plan on how they were going to get out of it. Well, we have learned they've just exited that with their new plan. It includes most of the things we already knew, such as closing their clothing line, focusing more on toys, as well as firing a lot of people. In this case, we know about a little over 600. I've seen both 600 and 650, but basically about 40% of their workforce. Now, whether this will be enough for them to keep going, supposedly that they've still seen a lot of interest in their toy line, which is why we're talking about, because toy line includes board games. But regardless, it's still something worrisome to hear about because 40%, that's a lot of people. But we now know it's official and apparently they're out of it. So I assumed the books are balanced, but we'll have to wait and see at least for a little while whether that they can keep that or whether that voluntary insolvency may have to become a mandatory one from the government. Recently, a report came out talking about looking at internal documents from Kickstarter and how 18% of their revenue actually has come from fraudulent projects. Now, we don't know the actual divvy of what kind of projects these come from, but considering board games makes a significant amount of those projects for Kickstarter, and if that 18% is generally equal among all the projects, it's still a lot of board game Kickstarter projects. I myself have backed a few projects that never delivered. And this is a big deal. We don't know how much Kickstarter made recently, but it's just showing more and more cracks in Kickstarter's system. And this is bigger as we're seeing a lot more of the titles that used to start on Kickstarter moving over to their competitors' GameFound and BackerKit. The biggest one obviously being the Haven line with Gloom, Frost, Haven no longer appearing on Kickstarter where they initially made their record-breaking project. Now, I'm sure there could be more details to this project, maybe more will be released, but needless to say, I think, at least I hope we see more investment from Kickstarter into how to protect their backers, as well as ways for them to just incentivize more people to return to backing, as well as making projects on their site. A little while back, I talked about the company Plan B and how a bunch of their titles, such as Camel Up, were being moved around in Asmodee, being produced by a different company. I brought this up because Asmodee, part of the Embracer Group, it was a worrisome sign that maybe they were trying to take as much out from Plan B and just sort of sell it off, basically part of the restructuring. Because currently the Embracer Group is missing quite a bit of money and there have been a lot of layoffs everywhere else except for Asmodee. I think currently in terms of jobs layoffs, not in terms of canceling projects and all that, it's been like 82 jobs, something around there, 80 jobs versus like 1,300. So a big significant of what's been cut from Asmodee versus everything else. However, they have reason to say that quite to the contrary of my fears, they actually have plenty of new projects in the works. Some of them plan to be released in the upcoming months. So it seems to be less of we are cutting away from Plan B and rather we are just reorganizing, maybe changing its focus and its efficiency. This is an inclusion to which I may have missed it when I last talked about this, but they also moved offices to be, and I believe it's in the same building as Asmodee. So it seems to be just more efficiency restructuring rather than actually giving up on projects and cutting staff, which at least at the very case, I seem to be a bit more optimistic here, mostly because Asmodee is the golden goose for the Embracer Group. So they don't want to show any signs of anything they're weakening. And this kinds of show off, especially to their investors, I'm sure that like, look, we're not even like cutting jobs, which usually is good, but like they're growing. We have new projects on the line. We're just making things work better. So as of right now, it does seem to be that Plan B is still something that you should plan for when it comes to future releases. Speaking of Asmodee and what they may own and what signs this could be when it comes to the Embracer Group dealing with Asmodee, Miniature Market, which Asmodee acquired a little while back, is no longer under their ownership. It seems new owners are now in charge. In particular, Christopher Arnault and Maud Decombre, I'm probably mispronouncing names and I apologize profusely, now are the ones in charge of Miniature Market. They have stated that they want to continue to focus on board games and hopefully the site will keep running as expected. Now, I don't know how much of a difference we will see personally of this. From what I can see of people talking about it online, basically when Asmodee took over, I saw some things saying that the shipping was better, but the customer service went down below. So hopefully with this new switch of hands, maybe the shipping speed will stay the same while the customer service responses could be a bit better. But of course, it's still going to sell plenty of board games. I don't know whether they'll get the Asmodee ones as fast because obviously it's a little easier when you own the company to get those games to the storefront. But it's still a place to check out. And if things change, please let me know in the comments down below. Our final news story is about Daggerheart, the RPG from Darrington Press, aka Critical Role. This was a new RPG they designed that uses cards and dice. And probably was in the works before, but really obvious that it was heavily influenced or rushed to get made in response to the whole OGL fiasco with Dungeons & Dragons last year. Well, the new RPG was sort of shown off, but now you can give it a shot. An open beta is now available, so you can try out the system. I don't think it's final. It's more of just seeing how it works, what needs to be tweaked. But if you want to see how their new RPG is designed to play, you can go check out the beta right now. On to game announcements. Now, I will say a bunch of these are actually from Gamma, which actually happened a few weekends ago, but we're just catching up now, and I thought I should go over because they have dates with a bunch of them actually supposedly released at Gen Con. So if you're going to be there, you can look forward to these. First, from Bezier Games, we've got 2 games, Sears catalog, as well as Xylotar. Then Keymaster Games has their farming drafting game Harvest that should be available at Gen Con. And then Leader Games, of course, their Arc game should finally be there. Really excited to see how that game plays. And then Portal actually has AI Space Puzzle, in which it's a cooperative game where you're all trying to work together, except one person is the AI trying to communicate with the rest of the crew. Then we've got some other games that are going to be a little bit later. Actually, one is earlier, sorry, and that's First Pack of Games, really cute small mini games. The 3rd set is going to be released this April, but the rest of these should be in September. First, we've got a Reiner Knizia game titled Butterfly Garden. That's going to come from Capstone, and like I said, coming September. Then from the OP, we have an Avatar game, this one titled The Last Airbender, Aang's Destiny. This is a game where you follow Aang's journey and will also be released this September. But that is all the announcements we have, which means we reached the end of the news roundup. Let me know any of your thoughts on the news stories, if I was being a bit too pessimistic in the beginning, or if these are things that we need to look out for. Let me know all your thoughts. I can't wait to read them in the comments down below. And once again, thank you so much for reaching this point. But this is the end of the news roundup. I'll see you next week to tell you what's been happening in the world of tabletop gaming.